First Person Advisors is now a subsidiary of NFP, the fifth largest insurance broker in the world, combining local expertise with access to global capabilities and solutions. Learn more at firstpersonadvisors.com.
Yeah, so my dad owned a bar on Skid Row at the corner of East and Washington Street, and I basically grew up in the back of it. And I hated it. You know, when I was doing it, it was different than what my friends were doing, and it took away my evenings and my weekends. But man, I learned so much there, so much about people a lot of us never have the chance to encounter. And so I really think nothing impacted me more, ultimately positively than seeing life from the back of a Skid Row tavern.
Little did Fred Glass know back then, he was in for the ride of his life. He would become a lawyer, a key political figure, where he eventually found himself spearheading the move to build Lucas Oil Stadium. Ironically, just a mile away from that tavern at the corner of East and Washington in Indianapolis.
As a small market, we figured the only way to generate the kind of money that we need to generate to keep the Colts was to build a new stadium. And we were kind of in a role reversal because people think of teams demanding stadiums. We were actually a community demanding a stadium because we needed that as the economic powerhouse for that. And it became our new town square, and it's an awesome amenity.
Colts blue in his heart, the cream and crimson of Indiana University in his veins. He spent 11 years at his alma mater running the athletics department.
I came here to try to reestablish a strong foundation for Indiana University athletics. I really feel like we have done that, and it's time for me to exit stage left.
Fred Glass, a self-described goof and knucklehead, his journey from Skid Row Bar to helping keep the Colts in Indianapolis to rebuilding a major collegiate sports program. Get to know him on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast. Hello and welcome to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. I'm Gary Dick. Fred Glass's life story is unique, to say the least. Son of an alcoholic father, grew up in a tavern struggling with self-doubt and anxiety, making his share of what he describes as stupid mistakes. But Fred Glass overcame it all. Wound up graduating from Brebeuf High School in Indianapolis, went on to Indiana University and earned his law degree from the IU School of Law. Fred then got into politics, serving a mayor, a governor, a senator, even a president. He spent 11 years at his beloved alma mater, serving as athletic director at IU before stepping down 2 years ago to return to the practice of law. Fred Glass has quite the story to tell, and he has in a new book, Making Your Own Luck. For more on that and an amazing life journey, I'm very pleased to welcome to the podcast, Fred Glass. Fred, great to have you on the podcast.
Gary, thanks so much for having me. I'm really flattered to be asked, and thanks for having me on the show.
You know, there's so much we can talk about. You have done so many things in a high-profile way, be it in politics, in the public sector. I mentioned Lucas Oil Stadium, and certainly as athletic director at IU. We'll touch on all of those. But I mentioned your book, Making Your Own Luck, and one thing really stood out to me. You talk about an odyssey from Skid Row to rebuilding a major collegiate sports program. Tell me about the Skid Row thing. That's the thing that jumped out to me. I had no idea.
Right. So when I was 5 years old, my dad bought a bar down on Skid Row. It's at the corner of East and Washington Street. It's a vacant lot now, not too far from the heliport. And it was a Skid Row bar. It was full of characters that most people would dismiss as vagrants and winos. And it was my great blessing in retrospect to get to know them as people. And I will tell you that I hated growing up at the back of that Skid Row bar. I spent a lot of time there. I was the only child. So you're in a parent family, and they were always there, and I was always there, and my friends were off goofing around and doing other stuff. I felt very different. I felt very isolated. I didn't like it. But I'll tell you, Gary, I don't think anything has been more positive to my formation as a person, as a leader, as a father, as a husband, as those years I spent, growing up in the back of that Skid Row bar.
Yeah, well, talk about that. How did that experience shape you? It really sounds like in so many positive ways.
It did because these were folks that, again, most people would dismiss, but I got to know them as people. Tiger was this hugely overweight guy that was given to audacious clothes. Animal prints were a favorite of his. And I remember one time he told me, the jukebox is my stereo. This bar is my living room. The steam table is my kitchen. And your dad's my friend. It's hard to hear that from people without feeling differently about them and knowing them as people. I'm sad to say that, I saw, the cops come in and hassle the patrons until my dad would give them a couple fifths of booze to kind of move on down the way. And I don't mean to paint with a broad brush that's normal. It's probably not, but I think early on I kind of saw sometimes how people on the low end of the spectrum would be treated by power authorities. So maybe it wasn't a surprise when some of these things came to light later on where that would happen. So it was just a great education. Again, I didn't like it, much like my dad's alcoholism. I didn't like that either. But both of those things, I think, have helped me be a more empathetic, person and leader.
I'm sure you took those experiences, those qualities, and really played a role in each of your stops in life. So many high-profile things you have done. I guess we can go maybe to most recently, and maybe the highest profile, at least here in Indiana, would be as IU athletics director. Role you had, I think, for 11 years. Thinking back when you took that job, why did you take it?
Well, first of all, I never aspired to it. It came out of left field. I started talking to the search committee about it. And I really took it, Gary, because I'd always been a staff guy my whole life. In politics, I was a staff guy, which I liked. I love being a staff guy. As a lawyer, you're a staff guy. You're working on other people's dreams, other people's businesses. And I thought, here's a great chance to lead something myself that's not only making widgets, although I think it would have been kind of fun to run something making widgets. But it was college, it was sports, it was Bloomington, it was the most beautiful campus in America, and so I became intrigued by it, and then I became really excited about it, and fortunately, I was able to get it sort of against the odds. That was kind of a crazy journey in and of itself.
Well, you mentioned excitement. I'm sure there was a high level of excitement going back to your alma mater, but the fact of the matter was, when you took over the athletics program, if you will, from facilities to the several of the programs, were basically in a shambles, right?
Unfortunately, that's the case. When I got the job in October of 2008, and luckily the folks at Baker Daniels were kind enough to let me spend the next couple months ramping up by talking to people. And I did that. I talked to regulators, donors, coaches, students, and much to my surprise, multiple coaches said to me, why would a guy who looks like he could be doing something else come here and do this? And that didn't freak me out or anything, but it made me sad because to me, again, it was Bloomington, kids, sports. But then I started to look at their reality, right? And maybe more so than anything, I think the adverse impact was I was the fifth athletic director in 8 years.
Yeah.
And imagine that, or your listeners imagine that. If you're running an organization and you're churning leadership like that, how can you get anything done? And then we were not far removed from the Coach Knight firing, the tragic death of Coach Hepner, who we thought would finally lead us to the promised land in football, and then the Kelvin Sampson debacle, where we were cheating and not particularly caring about academics. So the folks in the department, all good people, but they were in a dysfunctional situation, and they thought all that stuff was normal. And I fairly quickly realized that before I could really lead the department, I had to heal it, and that's when I tried to apply really some of the lessons I learned at Brebeuf and that the Jesuits taught me, not about religion, but about leadership. And as you know, I talk quite a bit about that in the book.
Yeah, it sounds like there was so much to do. What did you do? Did you decide to do first? Was it a challenge to kind of structurally organize, your game plan?
What I really decided to do first was listen. I was very cognizant that I was a suspect by the department and the coaches therein. I didn't play the game or any of the games. I was a huge fan, but I didn't play. I didn't coach. I wasn't from athletic administration. I was this lawyer from Indianapolis that had kind of this political background, and I think there was a lot of skepticism about me, which I got. So I was very focused on not being Mr. Answer Man, having all the answers. I dressed down every day, never wore a tie or a suit. That was kind of a handy thing because I love that, but I was trying to de-emphasize this kind of lawyer, big city persona. And I just was committed to kind of learning while I was there and hopefully gaining some trust and showing that I didn't have all the answers. But I learned a lot. So a quick vignette. I'm walking around, with the guy that's in charge of the training table, the cafeteria basically for the students. He also happens to be the CFO, which was not coincidental, I think, in this story. So I go down and there's these two tables in the cafeteria for the students. One has prime rib, broccoli, baked potatoes. It's awesome. And then the other table has like chicken McNuggets and frozen pizza and applesauce. And I asked the guy what the difference between the tables was. And he goes, oh, well, one's premium and one's regular. And I said, well, okay, well, what are the implications of that? He said, well, the football players eat at the premium table and everybody else eats at the regular table. And I said, hey, look, man, I am not going to be the AD at a place where students eating this crap have to sit and watch this other students, eating high off the hog. And he goes, I get you, man. No problem. We'll get some pipe and drape and we'll separate the two tables and they won't have to watch each other. And that made sense to him. And it was a real insight into the culture that was there. And so pretty early on, Gary, I even though I didn't make a lot of decisions and thought it was important to be a listener, I quickly came to believe that my role was going to be to rebuild the department culturally as a matter of values and physically, because it also became clear that our infrastructure was woefully out of date.
Yeah. Athletic directors, rightly or wrongly, are always, judged or at least positioned by the hires they make, the fires they make of coaches. Think back, you had some high-profile hires, certainly. Now, Tom Crean on the basketball side was there when you got there. You extended his contract, and obviously, ultimately, he left and was replaced by Archie Miller. Talk about that and what your thoughts are on that whole process and how that played out.
Well, first of all, I think Indiana University owes a huge debt of gratitude to Tom Crean. He took that job that wasn't the job that was there when he got there, because we had a lot of good players when he accepted the job. They all went away, and our best returning player was Kyle Tabor, who averaged 1.2 points a game. We were playing, kids from the Hyper and baseball players and stuff. And I'm not sure there's many coaches in the country who would have the willpower and be a force of nature to take us from how bad we were to really how good we got in fairly short order, given how bad it was. And I'll always be and feel indebted to Tom for that. He had a lot of great success, 2 outright Big Ten championships in 5 years, big wins, never quite got us where we wanted to be. But that's not why I decided to make a change. I didn't make a change because I was disappointed with his performance. I made a change because I didn't think he was going to get where I wanted to be. And where I wanted to be was unabashedly ambitious. And I told Tom, I told anybody else that would listen, that I thought we needed to perennially contend for Big Ten championships. We needed to annually go deep in the NCAA tournament, and then we needed to hang that 6th banner. And we were investing in the program that way, and we were expecting to get there. And I will confess, I almost didn't pull the trigger on Tom because I had just gone through a change with Kevin Wilson, and making a change with your 2 power coaches in 100 days, I wouldn't recommend to anybody. It was a very challenging time, and I almost fell back and really, given his previous contributions, Indiana, stayed with Tom. But I'm confident I made the right decision. And again, we can talk about Archie's hiring. I did a national search. Archie quickly went to the top. I felt very confident in him, and your listeners may or may not like this, but under the same circumstances, I do that all over again.
Well, there was a lot of support for that move. I mean, I remember at the time, All my IU friends, you look in the media, it was very positive. Why didn't it work, do you think?
I don't know, Gary. And one of the great things about not being the AD anymore is I don't really think about that anymore.
Right.
I mean, I definitely would do some do-overs in my career, but I don't regret anything. And I don't regret the hiring of Archie, and I'd do that again. And, it was a weird time. Circumstances are a little different. The pandemic loomed large, whatever. It didn't work out, but I don't spend any time thinking what might have been or why that was the case. One of the reasons I was ready to move on was because those coaches' decisions wore very heavily on me. And I love the job to the last day. I miss the kids, but I don't miss deconstructing and reevaluating those decisions.
I'll bet one more coaching question. And you mentioned Kevin Wilson, who came to IU. I think he was a coordinator at Oklahoma, a lot of fanfare. And then just all of a sudden it happened. He was out. Tom Allen was in. Take us back to that. Did that just, I'm sure there were things that built over time, but it just happened in a day, right? I mean, it seemed that way anyway to me.
Well, it certainly did. I mean, I announced Kevin's departure and Tom as the permanent head coach in the same press conference. And as I outlined in the book a little bit, I like Kevin Wilson a lot. And he did great things for Indiana football and brought a lot of what I hoped that he would bring with this combination of Oklahoma, yet also being at Michigan, Miami of Ohio, and Northwestern. And he's an enjoyable guy. He's a fun guy to know, and he's smart, and I liked him. But we had some philosophical differences really over the whole course of his tenure, to the point where, as I mentioned in the book, I almost made the change when I ended up extending his contract, because I did have serious concerns, notwithstanding what was some real success on the field. I had some real concerns about him leading the program, but I felt like he and I straightened that out. And I did give him a new contract. And I've been criticized, understandably, in some quarters for giving him such a contract if I had those concerns. But that contract was a very institution-friendly contract, to the point where when we did make the change, Indiana really wasn't out too much money, because, frankly, I did know that I wanted him on a short leash. And I negotiated a contract that reflected a lot of flexibility for the institution. So when I felt like we really weren't getting on the same page philosophically, I made the change. And I basically already decided, if I made a change, which I thought the change might be made to me, I thought Kevin might be so successful, he'd go on to what was perceived as a bigger job, that I was going to hire Tom Allen. I mean, I saw him up close, knew what he could do. And when I almost made a change with Kevin, I had been out in the marketplace and saw really, I thought, who was out there for us. And I was very comfortable moving forward with Tom Allen, even without a national search, and even though at the time I was criticized fairly roundly for that.
Yeah. What was that day like for you? I mean, that had to be a pretty intense 24 hours.
The hardest part of the job was making changes with coaches, and the hardest coaches to make changes with are your premier coaches. I mean, we were all about 24 sports, one team, but let's face it, football and the men's basketball make the world go around. And those were hard days. My wife would tease me, because when I was going through that, whether it was Bill Lynch or Kevin Wilson or Tom Crean, I'd lose about 15 pounds and just get sick about it, because it's a really odd dynamic, Gary. You pour your blood, sweat, and tears in these guys. You want them to succeed, and you have deep personal conversations with them, because a lot of times the AD is the only person who really tells them the truth, or at least the truth as you perceive it, because you tend to get surrounded by sycophants and so forth. Some of your listeners may have similar situations when they're CEOs of companies or whatever. So I felt the burden heavily that I had to be the one to tell them that what they didn't always want to hear, but to try to make them successful. A, because I wanted them to be successful, and B, their success was my success, right? Nobody wanted them to succeed more than me. But when there comes a time where you have to make a change, they almost unavoidably feel that as a betrayal, right? Like, how could you be in the foxhole with me 1 minute and then jumping out of the foxhole the next and taking me out? And that's a hard that's a hard thing. And it was very hard on me and much harder on them. So don't shed tears for me. But having that happen with those 2 power coaches in 100 days is what got me thinking that maybe I won't be a lifer in this job.
Yeah. Before we go to the break, one more on the AD role. Was there as you look back on your very consequential period as athletic director at IU, is there a moment, a hire, something you did that you, I'm sure there were multiple things, but maybe you're most proud of?
That's sort of like, picking among your children in a way. Right. And I was fortunate to have a lot of awesome opportunities and work with a lot of great people. I will not dodge your question, though, and answer that when we opened the south end zone, the closed-in part of the bowl, that may have been my most significant feeling of accomplishment, because while it was really important on the outside of that building, it made us a bowl, a Big Ten feel. I think it created a better atmosphere. It helps our recruiting. The real exciting part, the inside baseball, if you will, to mix metaphors, is what goes on inside that building. It's 100% dedicated to student development, student nutrition, student medical, athletic training, job opportunities, job training. And I think a thing that distinguished Indiana is that, we were committed to being the best athletic developer. Yes, we were committed to being the best academic developer, but a lot of schools have those as priorities. We had a third priority to develop our kids personally better than any other school in the country through the personal development, mindful, sequential programming that they would receive through their 4 years. And, you had a son that was very successful at the collegiate level, big time sports, big time football quarterback. And I think you could probably relate that the personal development part of it has more lasting power than even the academic or the athletic piece.
Yeah, no question about it. And well, you brought that up in terms of Assembly Hall, but you really shepherded transformation of IU athletic facilities. And you mentioned the broader student athlete. You got a great gift from Mark Cuban, right? As part of that, for a center that was established there. So, and you really pursued him and got that big check that helped make it happen.
Yeah, I have time for a quick story about that. It might be something your listeners are interested in. So, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that you probably ought to go ask Mark Cuban for money, if you're an athletics guy. So I went down there with Anthony Thompson, our great, probably the greatest football player to ever play at Indiana. And he and Mark had gotten a relationship. Mark and I were classmates, even though we didn't know each other really at IU. So I went down and tried to pitch him on making the gift for what became Simon Scott Assembly Hall. And I was very persuasive, Gary. You'd have been proud of me. But he's like, man, I don't give money for buildings. I think that builds in cost. He's a very strong hawk on reducing the cost of higher education. He goes, I'm not going to give you any money for buildings. So I said, well, okay, what would you be interested in philanthropically supporting? And he goes, I want to help you develop kids that I want to hire someday. Okay. So we left, and as your listeners know, you want to get a yes, but if you surface objections with a person who's a willing buyer, if you will, if you can meet their needs, that's a successful meeting, right? So we came back, and to make a fairly long story short, we were still on kind of the front edge of the changes in social media and moving from manila envelope recruiting packages to videos to communicate with our fans and our longtime employees. That was a new world for them. But my son could develop a video on his laptop or on his phone that ran circles around what our 25-year experienced guys in-house could do. So the idea was, let's capture those kids on campus in our media school, have them help us develop that kind of content. They get a portfolio. We get all this cutting edge stuff, but we needed technology, leadership, guidance. So I went and pitched Mark Cuban on basically what ended up becoming the Cuban Center for Media and Technology. And it was kind of funny. I went down there, and my staff wanted me to put together this dog and pony show with holograms and multiple laptops and show how technologically savvy we were. But I had done some research, and Mark had done a interview with Colin Cowherd, and Colin asked him, "What do you hate about the pitches on Shark Tank?" And he said, "I hate the backstory. I hate hearing about how they cut, cloth on their ping pong table, and just get me to the idea, So I went down there with literally a 3x5 card with my 4 points that I was going to make to him about, the Cuban Center and what it would be like. And he comes in all sweaty from just having done a workout. We're in a conference room at the airport, and I get literally to my third point, and he puts his hand up as if to tell me to be quiet. And so I was quiet. And he said, "That's something I could get behind. I'll give you $5 million to start."
Oh, outstanding.
Which was ironically what I was going to ask him for. So then I got the hell out of there, right? Because as your listeners know, when you get the business, get out of there. And so I got the business, I got the order, I got out of there. And then he's just been awesome. The money was great, of course. But really what's great is his connections to get us the most cutting edge technology. And these companies with the better mousetrap, they get it in our place, then they go sell it, say, "This is in the Cuban Center at Indiana University." So it's really propelled us into the forefront of social media and content and technology. And I could go on and on about that, but that was an awesome piece of our rebuild of IU athletics.
Great story and testament to due diligence on your part as well, Fred. Hey, we're going to have much more with Fred Glass after a break. Growing up in Indy, helping to build Lucas Oil Stadium, keeping the Colts in town, and a lot more. That is when the Business and Beyond podcast continues.
First Person Advisors is now a subsidiary of National Financial Partners, the fifth largest insurance broker and consultant in the world. Develop your total reward strategies all in one place with the combination of First Person's local expertise and NFP's global resources and integrated solutions. Learn more at firstpersonadvisors.com.
Welcome back to the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. My guest this week is Fred Glass, Indianapolis attorney, former Indiana University athletics director, head of the Capital Improvement Board here in Indianapolis, political leader, public sector champion, many, many roles. And Fred, again, thanks for sitting down with us this week. We talked in the first part of the podcast about growing up in that Skid Row bar and the lessons learned, and be curious in that environment, because obviously you became interested in academics and you became a lawyer. You went to law school. How did that play out? Were you a good student? I mean, you had to be a good student. Were you a great student?
I made good grades, but I wasn't a particularly good student. And the whole law thing, I think, really came out of, my dad went to law school and he dropped out of law school, but I was always interested in the law. Like all my cultural references are old, but I'd watch Perry Mason, Judge for the Defense. I read all kinds of books. Love to Kill a Mockingbird because of the legal component of that, and so I always thought I wanted to go to law school, and then I was always interested in government politics, and that seemed to make law make sense. So that was something I always wanted to do.
So were you North Central High School?
Oh no, Rebuff Brave.
Oh, that's right, Rebuff. I mentioned that earlier. And then was IU a foregone conclusion? Were yours? You gonna head to IU?
No, I applied to Marquette. My dad went to Marquette. That's really the reason I went to Rebuff, because he went to Marquette on the GI Bill and wanted me to go with the Jesuits. But our family's financial situation was not going to work for Marquette, and so I happily went down to IU. I'd been brought up an IU fan, was always an IU fan, and so IU was an easy move, an exciting move for me.
And was the law just kind of a natural path, or did you think about doing some other things?
I always wanted to. I always thought I wanted to be a lawyer, and I majored in political science, so I pretty much had to become a lawyer because I wasn't going to become a professor because I wasn't that interested in academics. But that was something I wanted to do. It felt like my dad always told me that being a lawyer is having a trade. His dad was an electrician by trade, longtime IBEW guy. And he said it's like being a plumber or an electrician. It's something nobody can take away from you. And that may sound kind of pedestrian, but I actually think it's fairly profound and real. And it played itself out in my career because, Gary, you might say I haven't been able to hold a job. I've done a lot of different things, but I always felt comfortable that if all the wheels fell off of these crazy things I decided to do, I could always fall back on my license. I could carve out a living by this license that I had. And so in a way, it was very emancipating for me. And really, Dad, I think gave me one of his gifts was this idea of the independence that a law license gives you.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So IU Law School, and then you wound up in Indianapolis. Talk about those early post-college days and how you got into, the whole political game, because that obviously has been a significant part of your life as well.
Well, let me tell you. I'll tell you a fairly quick story because I think it answers that, but also maybe it might be helpful to the arc of my story. So when I was a junior at IU, it was the spring semester, maybe March or even April, and I had always wanted to have an internship in Washington D.C. So I was with my girlfriend. We go over to the student building at IU. I meet with Reva Chrisman, my counselor, and I tell her of my ambition, and she basically says, well, you're an idiot, right? Because it's March or April and you don't sign up for an internship for the summer this late in the game, which was fairly typical of me at the time. But she said, hey, Senator Birch Bayh holds open a internship on his subcommittee on the Constitution that he chairs for someone from Indiana because he doesn't want all the internships to go to kids from Georgetown and George Washington and so forth, and you could apply for that and be in the fall of your senior year, and there, that's the normal ramp up for that and all that. So I hear all that, I walk out, and I'm talking to my girlfriend, and I was I always loved my comfort zone, Gary, and I had a good time in college, but I was very much in my comfort zone. I rarely got out of my comfort zone, and this thing was pushing me out of my comfort zone. I didn't like it. I told my girlfriend, I'm not doing this. This is stupid. I want to have my senior year in Bloomington. I can't, I'll be delayed in graduating. And the more I discounted this thing, the better I felt. And then much to my surprise and chagrin, she starts pushing back on me going, hey, I thought you wanted to be a lawyer. This subcommittee on the Constitution thing sounds good. And you could go to summer school to get your credits up so you can still graduate on time. And, I think you ought to do it. And I was pissed because I wanted her to, reinforce me getting back in my comfort zone, and she didn't. So to make a long story short, I applied for that internship. I got that internship, had an unbelievable experience. I saw in Washington, D.C. that what I thought was all magic by these superheroes behind the screen was really a lot of hard work by committed people. I'm like, I could do that. I could do this. I could be a staff person on Capitol Hill. And so that did a couple things for me. It gave me confidence that I generally lacked. And it also pushed me out my comfort zone and encouraged me in subsequent opportunities to get out of my comfort zone. And then the punchline is, in May, my girlfriend and I will have been married 40 years. And she continues to both support me and challenge me in very positive ways. And that everything I've done since, Gary, working for a federal judge, getting connected with Evan Bayh, going to law school, all goes back to that internship. It was a pivotal moment in my life.
That's a great story. Great story. We'll talk about the political connection in Indianapolis and that process, which catapulted you. Ultimately, you headed up the Capital Improvement Board. which is a very important position, obviously. And as you look at the sports venues in our city, in that role at the CIB, there were some high-profile things that went on, including the construction, right, of Lucas Oil Stadium. Talk about that, because that was an interesting time, because the Colts were out there. They needed a new stadium. They said they needed a new stadium. There was a lot of talk. Hey, they may leave. What was there a real as you look back on it? How real was that risk, do you feel, and the pressure that was involved in trying to put together a deal to build a stadium and keep the Colts in Indy?
Oh, I think it was a very real risk, and not because Jim Irsay was eager to do it. I think Jim Irsay didn't want to do it, but under different circumstances, I think he would have forced to do it for the good of his asset, the franchise of the Indianapolis Colts. So, Bart Peterson's elected in 1999, and I am head of his transition. He, to my surprise, asked me to head up the Capital Improvement Board. I grew up in Indianapolis. I knew the importance of the Capital Improvement Board. I watched P. McAllister and Jim Morris and Dave Frick and these great leaders use that for good for our city. So I was flattered to be, the next steward of that important body. And I also knew that I was only there because Bart Peterson trusted me, not because I was some genius or anything. And I think that humility of knowing, you're there and not entitled to that role is important. So we quickly surveyed the landscape of the Colts. And as you may recall, or some of your listeners may recall, Colts had a deal that the previous administration negotiated, a sort of a stopgap that the Colts were guaranteed to make the lead median in revenue, no matter how much money they made. And because of the nature of our stadium, because of the nature of the other stadiums, that gap was big and going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So basically, we were facing a situation where to keep the Colts, we were going to have to come up with tens of millions of dollars for years just to keep them here. And at the end, they're a free agent, right? So why wouldn't the Colts just collect those checks and at the end of the free agency go somewhere else? And that was untenable for us. We could give city money to this team and get basically nothing for it and no long-term commitment. Yet absent that, they were going to be able to leave. So the sort of the funny thing is, most situations, the team is demanding a stadium and the city is reluctant. Well, in our situation, the city was asking for the stadium and the team was reluctant.
Interesting, yeah.
The city, that the only way we could create a revenue generator, a cash machine, a money center, was to build a stadium that did all those things for you and would create the kind of money that would enable the Colts to feel like they could stay. But Jim Irsay understandably was like, well, I'm not sure this city will support that. I'm not sure even if you give me a turnkey stadium that's going to work for me. So we were in the weird position of trying to get the Colts to be interested in the stadium, and so we felt like, well, we needed to capture Jim Irsay's imagination, and that's when we had a competition. We invited 4 architectural firms, 3 participated. We got 3 vignettes, one of which looks a hell of a lot like Lucas Oil Stadium does today, and explained to Jim Irsay our vision that this would be the new town square for Indianapolis. We would have to own it. You can't own it, even though he wanted to. We're going to be the landlords. You can't be the landlord. It's going to be a multi-event venue. We invited the NCAA to the table. It's the only stadium in the history of the country where it was designed both for Final Fours and NFL football. We invited in what was then the ICDA, so that can also be converted to space for trade shows. There's really a lot of genius in that, of being a true multi-purpose stadium, not a lip service multi-use stadium. And Jim Irsay, to his great credit, bought the vision. I think in part because I think I can say he wanted to stay here. He didn't want to be his dad's legacy of pulling the team out of a city that loved it. And so Jim made a leap of faith, and we, the city, made a leap of faith. And as I outlined in the book, it took a lot of twists and turns. It didn't end up exactly where I thought it would be in terms of the relationships with the city and the state. the important part is it got done.
Yeah.
And think of it now, Gary, that's like $1 billion public improvement when you put the stadium together with the expanded convention center. But I believe it was absolutely necessary for the city, not only to keep the Colts, which whether you like it or not, helps peg us as a major league city, but also to help drive the hospitality industry, which is our special sauce, right? We don't have a seashore, we don't have mountains, but we've created over great leadership over 40 years across two political parties, across two ends of Market Street with the city and state, an event hospitality city, maybe without peer, that drives our economy.
Yeah, you mentioned twists and turns during that process, and certainly there was a lot of public angst. A lot of public opposition to it, to be sure. Was there ever a time you had self doubt? You just didn't think the deal was going to get done?
Well, I'd be lying if I said no. There are a lot of dark moments, but fortunately, it wasn't my first rodeo, and I cautioned everybody around us: don't get too high and don't get too low, because there were weeks where it seemed a foregone conclusion that touchdown, baby, this is going to happen, and there were weeks that were like, I don't know how we pick up these pieces, but I tried to stay even, and I thought we had a solid plan. I thought we made a compelling case. I thought we pushed the right political buttons, and again, it was touch and go till the very end. But I think he ended up passing the House like 88-12.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking about in this polarized environment, you pass anything 88-12, including a resolution endorsing the Girl Scouts or something. I mean, that's a pretty good score.
Right. Hey, how about you also, among your many endeavors, headed up efforts to attract the Super Bowl to Indianapolis. It ultimately, where did it go? That bidding process. That's right. That's right. Dallas. Tell me about that. That had to have been quite an experience, because, as I think most people would imagine, has to be just an inordinate amount of work and effort and time and blood, sweat, and tears just to put the bid together to get there. What was that process like?
Yeah, Gary, that was another really transformative experience for me. So we had just gone through the stadium piece. We were very careful not to promise a Super Bowl with the stadium, but we were very eager to go after one because it's an event city. If you could say, we can host the literal Super Bowl of events, we can handle your event, we can handle your convention. So the mayor asked me to put together a list of people who I thought would have the ability to lead a great Super Bowl effort, and I did that. I remember I met with Mayor, Deputy Mayor Kira Amstutz, and Director of Communications Steve Campbell, and John Dillon, who I think may have been the chief of staff at the time. But we went in there and at Dunaway's, the oxygen company, and I gave Bart my list of like 8 people, and we talked about it and blah blah blah. And then I perhaps made the mistake of excusing myself to go to the bathroom, and when I came back, those guys are sitting there like Cheshire cats, and they said, "We're unanimous. It needs to be you." And I'm like, I went on the list. I don't want to do this. I don't have the chops to do this. I've always been behind the scenes. This person's got to be out front. I said, I'm not doing it. And I, in fact, went to Bart after the meeting. I said, hey, man, I appreciate this, but I'm not doing it. I'm just trying to help build the stadium. As you may recall, we had this kind of funky thing with the state that they were going to build it. The CIB was going to operate it. And I felt like I needed to be involved in that process. And Bart just goes, no, man, you're playing defense on that. Playing offense is the fun part. You need to do this. You got to do this. And so I did it. And as you may recall, that's one of my precepts in the book that's happened to me over and over again. If someone offers you a job and you don't think you're ready, or you don't think you have the chops, or you don't think you have the expertise, or you don't think you have the time, if the person offering you the job thinks you do, then take it. Trust their judgment. Their judgment is the one that matters, not yours. And I trusted Bart's judgment. We raised $25 million in 45 days.
Wow.
For this effort. We did things that no other city's done before or since, in terms of raising the money in advance and not having any public money other than in-kind public safety sort of things, and really put an unbelievable program together with the efforts of a lot local folks, local video people, local creative people, and really we blew it out of the water. I will say maybe a little laudatory. We had Tony Dungy on our team, and he spoke, and I spoke at the piece. Then we lost to Dallas because, frankly, their stadium generated so much more money for the owners that we were swimming up against an economic current. We just
didn't Jerry Jones come in like in the 11th hour and add a bunch of seats or something, and back to to that whole revenue piece?
He did. We had him running scared. I mean, Jerry Jones had to squeeze some guys and put a lot more money in, and he sent me a really nice note afterwards about you pressed us, partner, and we lost 17-15. It could not have been any closer. We beat out Phoenix and other teams that were in, and then of course after that Bart lost the election, and so I resigned. I thought the new mayor needed to pick his person, and then they were successful. But I'd like to believe that first bid really helped lay the groundwork for that team to ultimately be successful. And in karma, being what it is, Dallas hosted the year that we were hoping to host it. They're in an ice storm.
Right. Yeah.
It's a fiasco. It's one of the unsuccessful Super Bowls from an operational perspective. And of course, we get it. It's 60 degrees in Indianapolis in February, and built on a lot of the things that we had in our bid about the downtown Olympic Village feel and all that. Indianapolis, as we're wont to do, knocks the thing completely out of the ballpark. So, like a lot of things, our short-term disappointment became a long-term advantage.
Yeah. Hey, final question for you, Fred. What's next? I mean, it just seems to me that you're in a really good spot. I mean, you feel comfortable about everything that's happening back in the practice of law. You have the book out. What's anything on the horizon now, or just loving life?
Well, I think both. I'm here at the Taft Law Firm. Taft's been very, very good to me, giving me a lot of flexibility, outstanding lawyers to work with. So I'm very happy about that. I've got some interesting things to do. I'm working with the Indy 11 on a new downtown soccer stadium, which I'm very optimistic about and excited about. The city's using me to work on the redevelopment of the Circle Center Mall, which I'm very excited about. I think will be a new driver of economic development in our community. So I'm really lucky to be back on working on some big projects, and I'm going to enjoy doing that. And being back full time in Indianapolis, and my grandkids are all here. So it's a nice blend of professional fulfillment, but personally being able to be more engaged with my family.
Well, Fred, it's been a real treat to have you on the podcast, and a reminder for our viewers, these stories and many, many others, really some compelling, interesting stories, can all be found in Fred's new book, Making Your Own Luck. It's at Amazon and really wherever you buy books. Fred, in Indianapolis and Indiana are both very lucky to have you. Your contributions continue to be significant. So again, thanks for joining us, and I hope to run into you soon.
Thanks, Gary. I'm the lucky one. Thank you.
Okay. And thank you for joining us on this edition of the Business and Beyond podcast presented by PNC. It's a weekly conversation with achievers in business, sports, entertainment, and beyond. And you can download it at Apple or wherever you find your podcasts. I'm Gary Dick. We'll see you next time.